Right before this video started, actually something very powerful came to mind, something I really want to share with you. I don't believe that the world's in just a bad place. I mean, that's very clear. But I believe that as individuals, we all are in terrible places. And not because the particular environment is something we can't endure. Actually, I think that's contrary to what people have seen about humans. Humans are remarkably resilient. It's actually that I think we're fundamentally taught to avoid ourselves. Now, there's a reason why I know this is true. It's because if you wanted to attribute this generation to one thing, I'd attribute it to lonely. Now, before you go ahead and think lonely as being surrounded by people, just remember, if you know what it's like being around your family during the holidays, if there's one thing that you can feel when you're around them, it's probably lonely. And I'd also compound that with sad. There's been a very powerful shift in my life recently, and I've realized the beauty of being able to experience your humanity it comes at the cost of your perception of how other people see you. That's a good thing, by the way, because truth be told, if you think you know who you are, I promise you, it's just a manifestation of your survival mechanism of how you want it to be seen. Who you are, well, I can give you guys a self-portrait. You're closer to a monster than your own perception of how you think you are. And well, that's good. I want to be able to challenge that. You need to be challenged that way. Why? Because if you're looking for intimacy, well, then you could only see into yourself. You can only see into others as much as you're willing to see into yourself. That's a good thing. You want that in your life. Because where there's intimacy, there's growth. You want to be able to interact with parts of yourself you don't quite understand. It's exactly what love is. You know, love is a challenging pursuit. It's a challenging ideal, and it's one that's going to, by the way, show you parts of you that you've rejected your whole life. And well, what are you going to do with them? Well, maybe you're going to learn to love them, because if you actually learn to love them, think about the kind of person you would be and how strong you'd become. So that's one part of what we're going to be getting into. But truth be told, I realized, during this time of the year, winter, the holidays, I've noticed how much even more lonely people are. You want to know the crazy part? Also never seen bigger masks on people's faces about how lonely they tell themselves they're not. Now, one of the most beautiful characteristics that any human being can connect to is to this existential emptiness. Now, before you go ahead and attribute that to something that's negative, I want you to know it's the very thing that you were born here to see that the world needs. It's a very calling to unity, and also it is the beginning of a relationship with yourself. I've always felt a few things after a relationship to only realize it's what I've experienced every day of my life, even when I was in the relationship. There's things that could blind us from our absolutely clear problems, and I believe one of them is, infatuation. That'll do it. A projection. Ooh, that will definitely do it. But here's the thing about all infatuation and all projections is it all comes down crashing, especially when it's used to avoid who you are. You really can't grow attraction when you're only attracted to the way that you want to see somebody. Well, that's not going to help you. You really can't grow love if you're not willing to at least to create a space to incorporate parts of even you and of your partner that you're having a hard time to understand. Think about how remarkable it would be to really show yourself in a world that constantly throws stones at anything that's real. I also think about the kind of curiosity, the kind of strength that comes with curiosity. It's remarkable too. So during this time of the year, I've noticed that I've heard it from more people than ever. And it's not just something I've heard from people at this time of the year. I don't think it's specific this time of the year, but I definitely noticed one thing is that, hey, it's cold outside. And something about that is isolating. And a lot of the times we attribute isolation to something to be negative. And it's like, I'll tell you one thing. If there's one decision that you can do to change your life, it's going to be voluntarily isolate. And it doesn't mean isolate in the sense that, you distance yourself from people. Most people do that unconsciously, by the way. And what do they do it under the narrative of? They do it under the narrative of I'm better than them. That's not what you want to do. What you really want to do is really understand who you are. And maybe perhaps every single mechanism and every pursuit that you've had has only been a manifestation of your insecurities and not truly who you are. That's the whole thing about insecurities that make them so dishonest, is that they're fundamentally lies. They're the lack of full understanding of a particular component of you that you don't really want to understand because it triggers you. So pretty much in other ways, it's you voluntarily trained yourself to become fearful of the very thing that you're too afraid to face about you. And that's not a good idea, especially when maybe what you're really pursuing is connection, what you're really pursuing is love. And so I've noticed in so many ways how I see how people are surrounded with their folks, their friends, their family, and they're still lonely. Well, you could also say that in a lot of ways. Maybe it has to do with people constantly having a plaque to their face, I always found that very interesting. You could really tell how connected somebody is to their life based off the screen time they have on their phone. And it's like, well, yeah, I could definitely tell how connected you are to your life because you're only looking at somebody's perception of it through a lens. What about your life, your lens? What about your very experience that needs to be experienced in order for you to actually understand these concepts? I've noticed it's actually very difficult to speak to people, not because actually people have a hard time understanding, but I believe that we've been so separated from the very thing that allows us to have mutual understanding, and that's life. We objectively experience that together. Somehow our sufferings bring us together. Somehow our feelings bring us together. Somehow the very things that is not surrounded our ego is the thing that brings us together. And I can tell you the one thing that brings all of mankind together, the void. The void. I watched a movie recently, and I recommend that you should watch it, A Complete Unknown. It's the biopic of Bob Dylan. Now, growing up, I hated Bob Dylan. I was like, oh, fuck, blow my brains out. As I grew older, I realized the amount of heart infused in his words. Now, if you want to know something very interesting about his character, is he's very melancholic, sad, and he's quite lonely. He went into a complete unknown, New York City, with a guitar and a good intention to tell the universe that he was grateful for what it's given him. And really, he wrote a song to Woody, and Woody was a very, very popular folk singer. And I love the terminology that he used. And it says, you know, when you played your songs, Woody, and Woody was sick, right? Definitely not in his prime. He got sick when he was at the peak of his career. Everybody recognized him. But then, you know, what good is your gifts if you have no ability to give it with no physicality, no vessel? And he told Woody, he's like, you know, your song struck me to the ground. And this also made me realize something very beautiful, is that when people are exposed to their family, they're really exposed to the foundation that allowed them to even contribute their gifts. So don't be so quick to reject them. Something even for me, I'd even attribute that I have partial arrogance in relationship to the foundation that's allowed me to be where I am. It's like, really what you guys are looking at is somebody who was given the foundation to actually have something to give beyond what the foundation had to offer. But you see how the ego likes to separate itself from it, like it wasn't the very thing that allowed you to have an evolution? I'm sure my voice will inspire others to do the same, just very similar to how some of the greatest speakers in the world have inspired me to do this. He writes in the song strikes him to the ground, and well, Bob writes a song that did a very similar thing to him. Well, that's beautiful. It's beautiful to see something come back. What I really loved about the character was really that he wasn't trying to prevent the loneliness, the sadness. Wasn't trying to keep distance from it. And it made me realize something that I believe we all share that brings us together. There's a fundamental loneliness, an emptiness. And what do we attribute that to? Well, of course, your insecurities and your survival mechanisms and the way that you want to be seen attributes that to one thing. I'll never be loved if I show people that. I want you to realize something, that you're never going to be loved because you never faced that part of you, to realize that that is the beginning of love in you, that you can give the world, that then you could then receive. There is nothing easy about facing that, because really you would need to have somebody telling you that's the very place you need to go. Now, what's really beautiful about the film is you get to see somebody who's not arrogant, but somebody who's onto something. There's a tremendous danger to not look at things outside of the umbrella of the awareness that you tell yourself you believe to be reality. Well, it's not reality. There's more than that. And truth be told, I've noticed this about every individual, is that like they've always seen things about reality that seem to be things that's so outside of what other people say it is. Well, in a lot of ways, that's very necessary. And you know, another point about the movie, and another film that I'm going to bring up that's going to really help you integrate a lot of what I'm talking about here, is there is nothing more lonely than never being seen, not even by yourself. So maybe what you attribute that feeling of emptiness to is really who you are. And maybe what you're really feeling is insecurity that surrounds it. But if you can't at least sit with the experience, then you'll never actually face that. And so then you'll be left with nothing meaningful. And you'll actually create further and further distance from who you are. I had a client mention that to me today. He was talking about that his whole life has been a manifestation of him avoiding these feelings of loneliness. And it's like, well, what's the most human thing we've ever felt in our whole lives? It's this desire to be together. It's the very thing that God tells Adam and Eve when they were a single entity. It's like, it's not good for man to be alone. So he puts a good sleep on him, and he pulls Eve from his side. Well, really, if you want to know something about togetherness, is you're going to have to create an opposing force if you want there to be a connection. And that's exactly what he attributes to Eve. And ezer kenegdo, a force onto him. in support of, right? And so now what you're really looking about connection is it's actually an invitation to opposition. And so, you're telling me that empty feeling, the void, your dissatisfactions, the lack of, isn't the very thing that brings you closer to you, and at least to you beyond your own understanding of you, and that's the beginning of love beyond what you limit it to be? Not only does your awareness increase and expand, but what you have to give does. And when you realize that void, sometimes you look to each other. And when you're willing to at least face it, you no longer look to each other to avoid it. You look to each other because you understand the value of connection and love in one another. Now we're no longer alone in the universe. We're more together than ever. So loneliness is attributed to one thing. It's hiding who you are, because you've never really faced who you are. Because the thing that lingers around you all the time is the very thing that is not only the gift that you were born to give to this world, but it is truly the most difficult thing in our lives, and it's learning to truly wrestle with that divine component. And in that is what you call love. That love transforms all. It transforms me. My life as recently has been very interesting because I'm very much in the dating scene. I'm looking for a partner. And that's not an easy thing to do nowadays. And you might even think, well, with your kind of awareness, you're probably killing it out there. It depends by whose standard you hold yourself to. But really, I hold myself to my standard, and I really know what connection is and what I'm seeking. Especially at this time of the year, you're like, fuck, it's cold. I'd love to spend it with somebody. That's a very real human thing. I can tell you things I've rejected about myself, how lonely I feel. The Bob Dylan movie did a really good job of that. It shows you, after fame and status and fortune, you forget that people only see you based off of the idealistic projection of the desires they repress. So you're like, oh shit, you become pretty much invisible when you become successful and rich? Yeah, absolutely. This is true for a lot of beautiful women too. They're not really seen for who they are, because really, marry them and you'll find out, right? And you could already tell for every guy that's married a super beautiful woman, they're like, why am I in court getting all of my assets ripped away from me? Well, it's like, well, congratulations, you're interacting with humanity. And it also showed another component, which is, if you're not really connected to what you're giving, then why are you giving it? This is the beauty of the film that really came to mind. And it was, he was able to open his heart and to maintain keeping his heart open because he understood the value of what he was trying to give was to bring peace into a world that was not only afraid, it was hiding behind the very things that are good. And it was. What was it hiding behind? The folk community has this idealistic idea of what life is, and it's about the guitar and talking about peace and values and God. And of course, what's the one thing that he does to the one environment that needs exposure? It needs exposure to reality, and reality is opposing. It wakes people up, it ruffles feathers, but if what you're really looking for is peace, it's in opposition. And if what you're really looking for is love, it's in that same kind of opposition of what you don't quite understand. And so he pulls out the electric guitar. And when he pulls out the electric guitar, he sings the same folk songs with the electric guitar. And the whole crowd boos. And they get riled up. Well, not the whole crowd. Some of the crowd is dancing. Some of them is clapping. Some of them is in shock. Others are fighting in the crowd. He puts down the guitar, he walks out stage. And he realizes he did what he was born to do. There was a reason why that sadness lingered. It's because he realized that the very connection in life that he seeks, sometimes you're here to send a message to the world that can allow a bridge for it to exist. There's a good and genuinely very powerful person who's willing to feel the cold side of the bed. Feel it, for God's sake. What does it really remind you of? Well, it's an existential component, like, am I alone in the universe, and when am I complete? What comes up, that feeling, that emptiness, that void, that very dissatisfaction? Well, then maybe begin that journey of love. It starts here. And you guys all know you have it. You're sitting down at your table with your family, your friends, and it's cold. You feel sad. You feel sad of a time that you were nostalgic of because you know that you can't even go back to those periods of connection or completion because now you're an adult realizing the only way you could experience that is in your past. That's not a way to live life. And sure, it's a time to be happy, right? That's what we tell ourselves. But actually, on the contrary, I think it's a time to experience the sadness more than ever. To accept the existential truth about your lives, our lives, my life, is that this emptiness exists there. But it exists there with a purpose. And interacting and investigating that will create the very thing that you're seeking, which is an embrace. What if that was no longer the thing you ran from, but what you run to? Would your relationships look the same? Who would you become in the face of it? Think about how much you would create, give, and contribute. And above all, do you feel that you will be lonely ever again? And I could tell you from experience, the last thing that I would ever attribute to me doing this is that I am lonely. I have never been alone. I've only tried creating distance for myself. And you're doing the same, and you don't have to anymore. Open the doors to your heart. It's uncomfortable. And maybe in a lot of ways you'll feel like there's very minimal control in that. But I'll tell you one thing, there's a tremendous amount of wisdom, beauty, strength, and courage that you will gain in facing that. And I believe above all, you will find true love. You will find true love in connection and understanding what real connection comes with. What's going on, everybody? I have an absolutely huge announcement. I am launching my new school. Now, this isn't just another cool way to watch more exclusive videos. If you like this one, it's a way to really start integrating all of this material because it's been my life's work over the last 3 years. Now, the beautiful part of it is that it's constantly uploading every week, meaning that if you like the beginning stuff, that's great, but you can also grow with me. I don't just believe that the work that I do is just to help you guys. I believe that it helps me in ways access inner beauty that I've never seen and discovered before, and I want you guys to be a part of this process collectively with me. I believe that the transformational process and the growing process is one that is for those who are willing to connect with their humanity, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. The best part is it's not just the videos. It's going to be me and you in the community integrating every one of those videos and some of the parts in your life that you believe that you're having struggles with. If this is you, you will see the link in the description, and I can't wait to see you join the revolution.